Were the McCanns unfortunate? But I'll start again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the Co-Conspirators podcast. As usual, I'm here with my co-host Luke.
Hi, everyone.
And my other co-host Callum.
Yo, what's up?
So, with all that's occurred in the world in 2020, Australia ablaze, coronavirus chaos, racial riots, people joke that the only thing missing was an update to the Madeline McCann case. Well, be careful what you wish for, because here we are.
Talking of 2020, don't know if you guys saw the thing about the Gregorian calendar this week.
What have they done now?
No, I didn't.
So apparently when we transitioned to the Gregorian calendar in the 1500s, we skipped out 8 years, so 2020, actually 2012, so it all makes sense.
Oh, actually, yeah, that does ring a bell.
It's just like retconning, isn't it? You just retcon the Gregorian calendar in 2012. But yeah, we'll roll with it. So the McCann family, were they unfortunate but careless parents, or a part of the greatest murder cover-up of all time? Well, hopefully we'll dig a bit deeper and we might be able to find out. So, for those of you who don't know, on the 3rd of May 2007, during a holiday with her parents, Gerry and Kate, and her brother and sister, in Praia da Luz, Portugal, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann went missing. What followed was the most heavily reported missing persons case in history, front-page news headlines for years to come, and over £10 million of taxpayers' money spent on the investigation. Despite all of this, over 13 years later, her whereabouts are still unknown, as is her method of death or disappearance, and also any involved parties.
We haven't really got anywhere, have we?
No, we really haven't.
It's rampant speculation.
Yeah, exactly. At the time of recording, there have been recent developments involving Christian Bruckner, a known paedophile and suspected murderer, who's currently in jail in Germany for the rape of a 72-year-old woman.
I don't want to be trivialising it. That is a little bit of a juxtaposition there.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit odd.
I mean, you can just assume that he's a horrible, horrible guy.
Yeah.
But I get your point.
But, I mean, at the time of recording, the only evidence linking him to the crime is all kind of circumstantial. So it's basically a case of, I think, or at least this is what we're being told in the press, there may be more concrete reasons. But basically, he was in the area around the time, and he's a known paedophile. But I think there were whispers that he'd maybe told somebody that he did it. So I suspect in the weeks to come, we may find out a bit more about that.
Do you know how long he's in prison?
7 years.
All right, so he might. I mean, occasionally you get the people serving life sentences. They'll just admit to everything they've done because they've got nothing to get out for. But if this guy's getting out in 7 years, he might.
No, it's a 7-year sentence. I think he's actually out quite soon.
Okay.
I think he served most of it. So yeah. So yeah, it would make even less sense that he would come clean about it. So what I thought I'd do to start the podcast off is just give a brief introduction and a little timeline of events, as well as maybe pointing out some of the holes in the official story. So we'll start from the beginning. On the night of the incident, the McCanns, along with their friends, ate at a nearby tapas restaurant while their children slept. So Gerry initially claimed that they chose this restaurant because they had a clear view of the children's windows and could keep an eye on them. And it also meant they didn't have to pay money for the night crash to check on their kids. So I think immediately this is quite odd because they had plenty of money, and the distance between the tapas restaurant and the children's room is quite an easily provable lie. So Gerry likened it to eating in the garden while your children slept in your home. But not only was the room 80 metres away from the restaurant as the crow flies, it was also obscured by pool umbrellas, a hedge, and a wall, and of course the fact it was nighttime.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird thing to claim, especially when they also claim that they kept having to walk there and back to go check on the kids, so clearly was some distance and not in eye line.
Yeah, exactly. If you could see everything, you wouldn't have to check, would you?
There's like multiple members of the party they were with. They were always just going back. That was like half an hour rotations, I think it was.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be. I was just about to touch on that, actually. So the family also stated that they, all the people at the table, took turns checking on each other's family's children every 15 minutes. So I think there were 9, I can't remember if it was, I think it was 9 adults, including the McCanns, who all had their own children. So they agreed that every 15 minutes, one member of the 9 would go and check on everyone's children. But as we say, if Gerry was so sure of how safe the kids were, why did they need checking at all? This story also changed dramatically to checking the kids every 20 minutes. It then changed to checking them every half an hour. It then changed to checking them every hour, before it then transpired that the families were only actually checking their own children. So as a result, Maddie was actually left for 90 minutes before Kate finally checked on her. And of course, she sadly found Maddie to be missing.
I think it's one of those ones that say they change the story. No one wants to come across as a bad parent, especially in this scenario. So you want to try and make out, oh, you did everything by the book. Well, as by the book as you can be when you're leaving your kids unattended when they're very young.
Yeah, I mean, as well, it's definitely something that they'll all collude on. There's no way, as a group, that any of them are going to want to admit any kind of wrongdoing or negligence. So it's all something that they will band together on, even if, they check like once every 3 hours or whatever.
Yeah,
I think the banding together is a big theme with this case.
Yeah, I agree. We'll explore that a bit later on. So yeah, at around 10 p.m. that night, the McCanns stated that they discovered Maddie missing. Around an hour later, the Ocean Club Hotel that they were staying at reported that they were told of the incident by the family and informed the police. Kate is said to have been witnessed running from the room, shouting, "She's been taken, she's been taken." Now, I think this is already a bit of a strange response, given Maddie could have been hiding in another room, gone to the toilet, or simply wandered off somewhere. So it's caused many to say that she was kind of planting a seed straight away by saying she's been taken.
I'd like to think she'd have checked the bathroom before screaming it.
Well, yeah, you'd think so, but I mean, she could have been under the bed. She could have been anywhere. She could have literally just wandered off down the corridor. You'd scream, I don't know, has anyone seen Maddie? Or you just scream her name.
Yeah, that's most likely.
Rather than she's been taken. Arguably even stranger was the fact that the twins were also asleep in that room and were left alone for hours while people search for Maddie. Surely one of the first things you'd do is check that the other kids are all right and ensure nothing happens to them. But the McCanns did the exact opposite and left them alone in a vulnerable open room that had supposedly already been entered by an abductor whilst they looked for Maddie. So basically what they did there, while they were looking for Maddie, they just left the room open and just left the twins asleep in that room and went out looking, which is such an odd thing to do.
I'd say, yeah, hold that thought for when I start to discuss some of the theories about twins, especially.
I mean, you say in that kind of situation, your head's all over the place, you're not thinking straight, but there's literally no excusing that at all, really.
No, there's not. Even if they're completely innocent, which for all we know they could well be, there is no excuse in that.
Odd thing to do, for sure.
Carry them around with you, or you just do anything to make sure they were safe too.
Wasn't one of their friends sort of in the room at that time or not? Am I getting this a bit confused?
So basically the friends were constantly in and out. So everybody suddenly split up to look, but they reckon up to about 40 people went in the room before the police arrived.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Then you imagine you've got the friends wanting to check on their own kids, or suddenly something's twigged in their head. Better get back just to make sure.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the evidence was destroyed in that way. It was tampered with because so many people had been in the room before the police arrived. It wasn't in the state it was left. Basically wasn't in a fit state to be examined. But anyway, so just 9 hours... So just 9 hours after discovering that Madeleine was missing, the story was headline news in the UK, featuring as the main story on BBC, Sky and all the other large news outlets. Gordon Brown, the then Prime Minister, was told of the incident the night that it happened by Jill Renwick, a close friend of the McCanns. A very odd thing to do would be to immediately tell the Prime Minister. The next morning, the British press was sent to Praia da Luz to report on the incident. It was an international media frenzy, and in the coming days, Clarence Mitchell, former spin doctor to Tony Blair, was appointed as spokesman for the family. Now, when can you last remember a case like a missing persons case or a missing child case being breaking news and headline news everywhere, especially just 9 hours after she's gone missing?
Yeah, I was going to say something about that. Like, how many other children get that sort of treatment? Yeah, maybe it's in a foreign country.
Thousands go missing a day. It's so odd that it was so quickly, because only 9 hours in, she could have quite easily been found in that time.
I just want to know, was it the parents who told their friend to go to Gordon Brown if they had this collection? Was it just, did you do it off her own back to get the story out there? You don't know.
Yeah, this is something I'm not sure of.
But just to get the Prime Minister involved so early, it just seems strange. You think you surely want to sort of gather yourself, trying to establish what actually went on, and then, because you don't want a massive media frenzy once it's been announced to the world. To send tabloids over an already very stressful situation.
I know. If someone in your family went missing, it wouldn't even cross your mind to phone the Prime Minister. It's so odd. And I think you'd be horrified if it was headline news. But just 9 hours after they went missing. Obviously, you want as many people to look for them as possible, but I mean, it's such an early stage. It struck a lot of people as being very odd.
Isn't there even a rule where you can't classify them as missing for 24 hours?
Yeah, in the UK, it has to be 24 hours. Possibly. Yeah, not sure on that one. Okay, the story that the McCanns fed to the press was that an abductor had broken into the flat via the window shutters using a jemmy and had taken Madeleine from her bed while her two siblings slept. So immediately you could make the claim, why not take all three? But I think that can be quite easily countered by saying, well, it's a lot easier to steal one child than three. But yeah, the way it was kind of billed in a few documentaries I've seen is that in that area, blonde and blue eyes is highly sought after or something. So they basically said they struck gold seeing all three, and it wouldn't make sense that a child snatcher wouldn't take all three.
It's German as well.
Oh, good point.
Very good point. So yeah, they claim that these shutters were broken, and this was reported everywhere in the press. They also reported that the front door was locked but had been broken open, and they theorised that the abductor had broken in through the window, taken Maddie, then left via the front door. Just 24 hours later, though, the story changed, as Kate and Gerry agreed that the door had not actually been locked before they left. So surely this begs the question, why wouldn't the thief just enter using the door if it wasn't locked? Why would he make the effort of going through what is quite a small window and having to take him and a child through it? The hotel owner, following an investigation from the police, also confirmed that the shutters were not damaged and could not possibly be opened from the outside. He even said it's questionable whether there was even an abduction at all. This means that the abductor could not have entered the flat via the window, as Kate claimed. In fact, the only DNA found on the shutters was on the inside, and it belonged to Kate McCann. Had she opened them intentionally to provide an explanation?
I suppose you say, well, maybe your story not being 100% straight in the heat of the moment. You're not sure if you've left the door completely shut or locked.
That thing's almost a side note, though, because I think it's such a strange thing to lie and say, yeah, we definitely shut the windows and they look like they've been broken into and opened, when in actual fact the windows had no damage, no DNA other than Kate's on them, and they'd just been opened normally.
Yeah, that's where it does get a bit more strange, especially the act of breaking in from the outside into a shutter that's been closed, you'd think.
It's like they've overcomplicated it for no reason. The McCanns had to explain how the abductor got into the flat, so their story then changed as they said that they did not shut the patio door, so the abductor could have entered via this open door. How careless. This was surely in response to the police stating that there were no signs of a break-in using either a door or a window, and that it was actually impossible. So basically the McCanns changed their story again and said that actually they think they left the patio door open and that the abductor probably entered via that. But they only said this after the police said there was no sign of any break-in in the flat using either a door or a window. McCann spokesperson Clarence Mitchell then claimed that the abductor had entered via the patio door but exited via the window. Now, this is completely illogical and contradicted by evidence of neighbours hearing nothing and also zero DNA evidence found on the window. This strikes me as an attempt to backtrack over their claim that the windows were open but had been shut when they had left the children. They even went as far to say that the window must have been opened in order to throw police off the scent.
With the window thing, I remember reading about this sort of, I suppose, a gust of wind or something that was part of. Is that going to be touching on that?
So basically, Kate got asked to do a reconstruction, and she paid a lot of attention to the fact that she basically was going to go in to check the children, but she was just listening in. She wasn't going to bother poking her head around to check, which, again, negligent as anything. But then just as she went to close the door, it slammed shut, which prompted her to open the door because it slammed shut due to a gust of wind. So that told her that the window was open when she says that she left the window shut. So it was only that gust of wind indicating that the window was open that made her check the children at all. And that's when she found out Maddie was missing.
Oh, right, okay, right. Another one that doesn't exactly corroborate with the window being broken into, or...
No. So the only way that the window being opened by somebody that wasn't the parents, following proof that they weren't broken into, is this explanation from Clarence Mitchell that he entered via the patio door but exited via the window, so opened the window from the inside.
It's making things more difficult for yourself, especially carrying a child through a window. So it's probably more plausible for them to come in through the window and go out through the door if they realise that, oh, actually the door's open.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've just come in through the front door, well, the patio door, you know that's a way you can get in without being seen because you've just done it. Why would you not go out through it? It doesn't make any sense. So Kate also stated that she knew Maddie had been taken because the door to the children's room was more wide open than they'd left it. But this contradicts with their statements that they believe their friends had checked on the kids earlier that evening, because Kate would have no way of knowing how far open her friends had left the children's door. The stories of the McCanns and their friends quickly began to contradict each other. Jane Tanner, a friend of theirs who was on the holiday with them, even went as far as saying she saw a man near the apartment holding a girl that looked like Maddie, wearing what looked like Maddie's pajamas, but didn't think to mention anything for months after the investigation started. Now, this is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. If it is true, you've got absolutely no reason to wait that long. It would be the first thing you would say to the police and to the McCanns. So I think it struck a lot of people as basically being an attempt to shift blame away from the McCanns by basically saying, no, they can't have done it. I saw somebody with her.
Yeah, there's no other way of looking at that. It just seems so fishy because I'm seeing a man carrying a girl in pajamas at that time outside the apartment. Regardless of the actual situation, would seem a little bit odd, and that was something that stick with you. And you'd maybe mention that to the McCanns. They've just had a child abducted. So they believe.
It's odd enough that she didn't immediately check Maddie's room. It's even odder that she didn't then immediately go to Kate and Gerry and say, I think I've seen someone with Maddie. And it's then even odder that when it was kind of found out that she was missing, that she didn't even mention it then.
I guess you could argue that once all that time's passed and you think, oh, shit, I might have seen her taken, but like if I tell them now, they're gonna absolutely kill me. So, but then it just got in so deep. She's like, all right, fair enough. I have to say now, but that just seems even worse.
Yeah, it's a weird one. And they did actually find somebody who kind of sort of fit her description of the person she gave. I mean, she gave a very loose description. It was like tall, middle-aged man with dark hair. But there was somebody who fit that description staying at the hotel that time. And he came out and said, yeah, I was carrying my own daughter.
Yeah, that just seems circumstantial at best.
Yeah. I don't
Why
think there's
any
anything
chance
in
that that German guy matched that description? Or...
I'm not sure, you know. I don't know we've had a description of him because it's still so hot
I
off
think
the
I've seen a
press.
picture of the German guy, and I've seen the artist impression of the person who was described by Jane Tanner. They didn't look particularly similar. I think one guy had long hair, and the guy who's been convicted in Germany has the short hair. But I think that's about as far as it.
Could have got a
Yeah.
haircut in the last
Yeah.
12 years or whatever.
Coronavirus trip. So, in the days after Madeleine's disappearance, both Kate and Gerry were interviewed multiple times by police. But staggeringly, in a 2007 police interview, Kate refused to answer all 48 questions, which included really simple ones such as who contacted the authorities when Maddie went missing, and did any neighbours offer you any help in searching? This is a baffling thing to do. I mean, surely a mother missing a child would tell every piece of information that she could possibly think of to the police in order to help the investigation along. Another thing worth noting was the fact Gerry was interviewed alone, but in a rare breaking of procedure, Kate was interviewed with Gerry sat directly behind her, offering her comfort and encouragement. After a turning of public opinion in Portugal and various pieces of evidence pointing to the McCanns, they were eventually made a formal suspect, or arguido as it's called in Portugal, at which point they fled the country despite previously stating that they wouldn't leave without Madeleine, and they embarked on a global campaign which included meeting the Pope. As it stands, we still don't know what happened that fateful day, and we may never know, but hopefully this podcast can help shed a bit more light on some of the theories out there. So I'll hand over to Callum, who's going to discuss one of the biggest theories that implicates the McCanns in the death of Madeleine.
Right, yes, thanks for that, John. Good introduction there, nice summary of the events. I think for now, this is where the podcast might take a slightly darker turn, as we're entertaining the possibility that Madeleine McCann's disappearance was actually the work of her parents, Kate and Gerry. Just several lines of thought of this one, but one of the main suggestions is that they gave their daughter an overdose of a sedative drug, which caused her accidental death. This accusation has followed the McCann family like a dark cloud throughout their 13-year ordeal, perpetuated by a whole host of conspiracies when considering the wide range of potentially contradictory accounts, theories about the evidence that have been presented, as well as rampant speculation by the media. As this is a case that's been in the public eye for so many years now, been all over the world with it. Everyone's got their 2 pence on what's happened.
Yeah, I'd say for anyone not too familiar with this case, because obviously it's absolutely massive in the UK, I genuinely believe it's probably a majority who actually believe that the parents are responsible for the death.
Yeah, I think overwhelmingly public opinion in the first couple of years was something stupid like 95% believed they were totally innocent. And then it's just kind of year by year, it's just decreasing. Now more people believe they're responsible than don't.
Yeah, I think it's just not helped by some of their demeanours in these press conferences. I think Kate, in particular, has come across as quite cold and almost unremorseful. And that's just not helped sway like the general public opinion. You seems like wanted to be grieving all the time and in tears and stuff. Where she's been generally remained very composed, giving interviews.
Yeah, I think a lot of people's problem is when they see interviews about it, it's almost as if they're trying to put across a point that they're innocent rather than we need to find our daughter, which has rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, I think.
As you mentioned, John, like the fact that in 2009 Portuguese police had named them parents as suspects was definitely enough to convince some people of their guilt. See, further exacerbated by inconsistencies and sometimes adamance of certain details despite considerable evidence to the contrary in the stories recounted by the infamous Tapas 7, the 7 friends that were with the McCanns on that fateful night and also throughout the holiday, I think.
Yeah, they all went together, they all flew together and booked it together.
Many believed the stories would be manipulated behind the scenes in order to construct a narrative that would absolve the McCanns of any blame. Hence, sort of the almost very complicated, very detail-heavy stories, almost giving it too much detail, which is causing people to then trip over upon later accountings. So like you said as well, like the most notable example was this Jane Tanner's insistence that she'd seen a distinctive-looking man walking past the apartment carrying what looked like Madeline McCann, wearing her pyjamas, but didn't think to mention it until months after the event. So one particular suggestion as the potential cause of Madeleine's death was that she was accidentally given an overdose of a sedative drug designed to ensure that she stayed asleep while the parents spent time with their friends during the holiday evenings. There is considerable evidence that supports the fact that sedatives were used during the night on the 3rd of May 2007, evidence that is on the public record. So as we mentioned in the timeline, sort of the chronology of events, at around 10 p.m. on the 3rd of May 2007, Kate McCann entered the apartment in the holiday resort and reported that Madeleine was missing. The two younger twins were still in their travel cots in the same room and were asleep. After the alarm was raised, the apartment was subject to a whirlwind of activity, including searches of the building by parents, members of their friends coming in and out, the police doing their own searches. Kate and Gerry were in apparent hysterics, shouting Madeleine's name outside the house and knocking over things, opening cupboards, slamming doors, the like, just creating a bit of a commotion, a bit of a ruckus. And also the twins were taken out of their cots and carried to another apartment by their friends, as well as the window and shutters being opened during a relatively cold evening in Portugal. During all of this commotion, the children did not wake once.
It's so odd, that, isn't it? I mean, aren't children notorious for waking quite easily and being very disruptive when they sleep and waking up at all hours?
Yeah.
So to not wake at all, to not even stir, I think it's a smoking gun in
Oh,
terms
absolutely.
of sedation. Especially because aren't they anaesthetists? Isn't Kate
There's
qualified
two
anaesthetist?
qualified anaesthetists in that party, and they're all medically trained. There's several of them are definitely from a medical background.
Yeah, well, Kate's a GP and Jerry's a cardiologist. So, I mean, they both will have had to deal with anaesthetic anyway. So then if there's even more of them, I think, yeah, they probably would think, we need an evening to ourselves or whatever, we may as well. The kids are all razzed up to being at the kids' club all day. I think the logic's there.
Apparently some accounts that Madeleine would go into the parents' room on some nights, just waking up. I think that's part of their story. They'd say on previous nights she'd be coming into their room in the middle of the night, just wandering around, not being sound asleep like the twins were for 10 hours in the midst of a big commotion.
And I don't know if you're going to touch on this, so stop me if you are, but there were reports and a few guests said that Madeleine seemed very drowsy, to the extent she came back from the kids' club one night and had to be carried back all the way by Kate, all the way from the beach to the apartment, because she said she was too tired to walk, which maybe suggests that she was sedated at some point and still feeling the effects of it.
I wasn't actually going to mention that, but I did read that I think it was during that day she'd had, I think sailing and tennis or something, but it might not have been enough to suddenly just have this rapid deterioration in her energy levels from being hyperactive almost to being unable to walk back after just maybe 3 hours of activity, if that.
Yeah. It's worth noting.
So just on the specifics of levels of sedation, so they're assessed in accordance with the Ramsay sedation scale, which assigns different levels of responsiveness on a 6-point sliding scale. The evidence stated earlier places the twins at level 6, the highest level of unresponsiveness, having not been roused by a wide range of external stimuli, including cold, light, noise, including screaming, inevitable jolting of the cots placed together in a small room during the search, and the windows and shutters being opened and closed, human touch being picked up by another person other than their own parents.
Probably just a cover for leaving them alone. Just going for the excuse they're asleep the whole time, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. But then you think, it just seems so fishy that they just didn't wake up once during all of this. Because the whole group has been reported to have been out quite late on several evenings, as you want to on a family holiday. You want to try and enjoy yourself. But they'd be thinking just dosing with a sedative just to ensure they sleep, so there's not less of a risk of them getting out, maybe leaving the house by themselves. I don't know. So from this evidence, it seems like it's almost not guaranteed, but it'd be hard to argue against the fact that the sedative was involved, which now poses a second question. Who was it that administered the drug? Was it the McCanns? Or perhaps an intruder looking to snatch one of the sleeping children? In her 2011 book, entitled Madeleine, Kate McCann was adamant that the kidnappers had sedated her 3 children as part of the process for abducting Madeleine. However, if witness statements were to be believed, the window of time within which the kidnapper would have had to carry out the act was very slim, only a matter of minutes between Gerry leaving to check on the children and Jane Tanner seeing him on the street talking to another one of their friends, Jez Wilkins, before her aforementioned sighting of the quote-unquote kidnapper. Theorists have taken all of this into account and basically been very in-depth in measuring the distances from the tapas bar they're at back to the apartment, taking into account times that they stated they went back to check on the children, Gerry's several-minute-long conversation with Jez outside the apartment, and have deduced that, assuming the recollection of events is entirely accurate, that the kidnapper would have had a window of opportunity of around 1 minute and 20 seconds in which to kidnap Madeleine. During this time, they would have had to enter the apartment, sedate all 3 children in the dark, select Madeleine as the victim in the dark, open the shutters and window if you use the front door to enter, pick Madeleine out of her bed in the dark, turn her around so that her head is now to his left rather than to his right, which is the way he would have approached her in the bed. That's to corroborate with Jane Tanner's sighting of the man holding she was quite specific about the way she saw the man holding, quote-unquote, Madeleine. Like her feet were oriented a certain way and her head was to another.
Because you made a big deal about he wasn't carrying her like you would carry your own child. It wasn't like head on the shoulder, was it? It was almost cradling.
It was like horizontal to the ground.
She was just trying to emphasise the point that it was like somebody holding a child that wasn't their own.
And also, in the same time, he had to exit the apartment either through the open window and shutters or through the front door, which he then must close silently behind him. Walk to the left along the path in front of the apartment, walk straight ahead across the car park, then walk to the right along the road and cross the street just in front of Jane Tanner, the father of the very child he'd just abducted, and another man who has his own child in a buggy. So quite a lot to do and execute within this said 1 minute and 20 seconds, or give or take a few seconds.
It's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? I don't see the point. Why would you bother anaesthetising if you're saying... Because he probably knows he's got, a minute at most to get in there. You could probably, if everyone's going to be asleep, you could probably get in, grab her, get out without having to bother anaesthetising them. They probably wouldn't stir anyway. So it seems like an unnecessary risk. Plus, it isn't going to be instant,
Exactly.
is it? You never do an injection and you're instantly out. It always takes a little while. So it seems like an unnecessary risk. It seems like a point.
Yes, some of the most popular methods of anaesthetic is normally result in the patient falling asleep in 20 minutes, taking time for the child to either ingest or have it injected or delivered as a gas, which would also require specialist equipment if they're going to administer it via gas. This further hinges on the fact there was no evidence of any smell of anaesthetic gas, and the intruder reported by Jane Tanner was not described as carrying any specialist tools or, say, gas canisters, masks, etc., just the child. And obviously no evidence of anything found in the apartment. But the twins were left comatose for 10 hours and did not exhibit any side effects upon waking, which does rule out the use of a less refined drug such as chloroform, which would have only taken effect for 3 hours with a sufficiently heavy dose and would have caused vomiting upon administration and upon awakening. Chloroform also has a very distinctive smell that's known to linger in the air long enough to remain when the parents return to find Madeleine missing. Just one more thing on the timings. You have had to administer the anaesthetic separately to all three children, which, again, it seems very implausible within this very small time period he may or may not have been able to operate within.
So did you say the McCanns have that's their theory, that he did anaesthetise them? So they're not backtracking the fact the twins were asleep for that long then, are they? They're admitting that.
They've said in their book, which was where she first, I think, went in on the idea that the kidnapper must have used a sedative. I think chloroform was actually written on the original report by one of the police. I'm not sure on the exact specifics of it, but chloroform was definitely postulated as a possible cause, but then that's since been debunked by general evidence considering chloroform-related cases.
Yeah.
So as you said, regardless, the McCanns have been happy to allow this suggestion to remain known to the public and have never gone on record to correct it, despite the evidence to the contrary. There's been several instances of the McCanns sort of sidestepping the issue when confronted with the possibility that they were responsible for sedation. Never was mentioned during interviews. The McCanns have wavered between initial acceptance through a period of stout denial during which they aggressively threatened to sue, and ultimately backtracking to a clear statement that they don't now believe that children were indeed sedated by a third party. However, they've always vehemently denied the possibility that they are responsible for administering the sedatives. Of course, it's just ethics alone is a minefield on that one, for sedating your own children.
Yeah, worth it for some tapas.
Better be good tapas.
Tapas.
Just that nickname, it just does make me laugh a little bit.
They're up there with the Secret Seven and the Seven Samurai.
It just doesn't even sort of ring.
No.
Tapas 7.
While it is impossible to definitively prove anything, we do know that, as mentioned previously, Kate McCann is a qualified anaesthetist, as was Dr. Fiona Payne, another member of the Seven. Also, recounts of Kate's actions upon returning to the apartment are very questionable, especially for someone with extensive medical training. Again, in the book Madeleine, Kate recalls, and I quote, wandering into the twins' room to check on the twins' vitals by placing a hand on their backs to check for chest movements and any sign of life. This seems very strange for a mother who recounted being hysterical upon finding that her daughter was missing, hitting walls, slamming doors, running, creating a general commotion, all suggesting actions of urgency and tension. Perhaps more alarming is the lack of efforts to rouse the children, especially coming from a medical field where the importance of waking individuals from states of sedation is constantly reinforced, as is the importance of seeking medical assistance when a patient does not respond to external stimuli.
Is the argument then if they sedated kids that she got back to the room and Madeleine was dead because she'd overdosed and then they ditched her body? So
that is one of them.
I think it's also this is implying that she had sedated the twins as well and just seemed, they're still asleep, that's normal, there's nothing going on. They just check, yes, okay, they're breathing, that's fine. But other doctors had entered the apartment with the family coming in and out and the friends just in the whole general commotion. And no doctors were in the twins' room performing the clinical checks that would be expected for someone of their profession, looking for vital signs, nor did they attempt to awaken the children, something that would be standard protocol for a trained professional. Does this suggest that the parents were involved with the sedation of the twins and, taking a more sinister view, could have accidentally overdosed Madeleine, leading to her death?
Is that the main theory you're going with, that they accidentally overdosed?
It's one of the two theories, and the other theory is that Madeleine fell and injured her head and sort of, I think, bled out, terminal bleeding.
Yeah, they've got so much experience with kind of sedatives. It kind of strikes me as somewhat odd that they could accidentally kill her, because they'd know what the limits were. They'd know what the dangerous limits were of sedative to put in, especially a young child. They'd know to be careful with it. So it would have to be seriously careless to get that wrong. Also added into that, if they were given the same volumes to the twins as they were to Maddie, you'd expect the twins to die as well.
Yeah, that's true. But I think also if you're dealing with your own kids, you would be naturally a little bit more cautious just in case.
Yeah, you'd think so. I think with the sedation one, the one I would be more inclined to agree with what could have happened, although I'm certainly not ruling out that she died from an overdose of that alone, would be that she fell over and woke up a bit dazed because of the evidence that I don't know if you're going to touch on about kind of blood and stuff was found in the room in a place where you could quite conceivably fall.
Yeah, so I think that's supposed to bring me nicely on to the next point. So as you mentioned, was there foul play at hand? So enter the sniffer dogs. A combined operation was carried out between British and Portuguese police that gave the opportunity for 2 trained sniffer dogs to search the apartment and surrounding areas. As we mentioned previously, Dr. Goncalo Amaro was acting on the belief that the McCanns were not telling the truth and thought there was a possibility for Madeleine to have died in the apartment. In short, the dogs identified the odour of a corpse in several places in the apartment. So I'll let John maybe go into further details here as he's got more knowledge of this specific area.
Yeah, so I'll just go into a bit more detail. I won't go into it too much depth. So yeah, Amaral, who was the head of basically the equivalent of the Portuguese FBI, he was involved in it, and he was aware of a man called Martin Grime who had used and trained dogs for many years. So the reason dogs are used is they've got 220 million olfactory receptors in the nose, whereas humans only have about 5 million. So they can basically smell things in a lot more detail and a lot stronger than we can. So sniffer dogs as a whole have about a 92% success rate. But the 2 specific dogs that Martin Grime brought over, which was 2 best, were Eddie and Keeler, who had a combined 99.9% success rate and had only ever falsely alerted once, I think, between them, which was in a test run very early on in their training.
Like 200 correctly identified cases.
Yeah, I think it was over 200 like actual cases rather than just tests.
How many olfactory, I can't remember the word, dogs have?
4 times as many, 20 million compared to 5 million?
No, they
220.
They have 220 million, we have 5 million.
40.
Yeah, so it's about 44 times more.
And they smell each other's asses. And
yeah. Yeah, so imagine doing that, but you're smelling it 44 times as strong. And they do it for fun. So yeah, the dogs, Eddie and Keeler, both had a 99.9% success rate between them. They were used for the sake of consistency in 5 apartments in the Ocean Club hotel complex, but they only alerted in the McCann's apartment. So one of the dogs was trained to alert for the smell of human blood, and the other one was trained to alert for the smell of what's known as cadaver, or what's basically corpse. So it alerts to a corpse.
So it gives off gives off a specific smell.
Yeah, it gives off a scent. So the reason they were both brought together is one of them was obviously human blood, but just human blood alone doesn't really prove anything because you could just cut yourself, I don't know, playing tennis or whatever. And then the other one is corpse, but I don't think it was strictly human corpse. So what they needed basically is for both of them to alert together. It would prove that not only was there a presence of corpse, but also human blood. And that would prove that somebody died there. So both dogs alerted in only the McCann's apartment of the 5 apartments that they were brought into. And they alerted to behind the sofa under the window most strongly. Now, apparently, Maddie had been seen by some of the other tourists and also by some of the workers waving from that window a few times during the holiday. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that she's climbed up onto the sofa to look out the window or to wave and has then fallen because of her drowsiness, because of the kind of sedation, hit her head on the way down, and that's why there was a lot of blood and corpse that were both detected in that little spot under the window. The other places that the dogs alerted to, both of them, was on Maddie's teddy bear called Cuddle Cat, and also in the McCann's hire car, which interestingly they didn't hire till I think 24 hours after she went missing. And also they alerted on Kate's clothing, as well as a little red T-shirt that has never been claimed by anyone but is supposedly belongs to Maddie. So the dogs have detected blood and corpse on Maddie's teddy bear in 5 spots in the apartment, including one of them was in the wardrobe, one of them was behind the sofa under the window. They've alerted on Kate's clothes and in the hire car. So I think one of the theories with the wardrobe as well is maybe the body was there for a period of time before being moved. And it was also found in the McCann's hire car in the boot as well as on the seat.
Finding that many different correlations of the corpse and blood in the same spots in the house, like on Kate's clothing as well. People have suggested that maybe that being a result of Kate coming back, finding Madeleine's body and just like in grief hugging it.
Yeah,
so it seems like your reaction is to hope it's not actually happened. What's happened? Say she has fallen out of the window.
One thing that perhaps gives a bit more strength to just how strong the dog's noses are as well, just coming back to it, is that Maddie's teddy bear cuddle cat was actually washed the day after she went missing. Kate put it in the washing machine and the dog still alerted to it, which is such a strange thing to do, put it in the washing machine as a whole. But the fact the dog still kind of picked up on it and said, yeah, there's a scent here. Both dogs were led past the kind of waste, the meat waste bit of the hotel. So when they threw out all their raw meat and stuff, and neither of them alerted to the blood or the obviously dead scent near what clearly wasn't human. So again, probably gives a bit of credit to them that they don't just alert to any old blood or anything. Because there's been a few theories saying, well, maybe they just alerted to a dead bird in that apartment. But obviously they specialise in human blood and they didn't alert to some of the waste from the hotel kitchen. So I think they're very much to be relied on. The police have used them for many years as well in some quite big cases.
They wouldn't still be used if they didn't work. They hadn't had a proven success rates.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't be brought over.
Have you ever been in a place where there's sniffer dogs for like drugs and stuff?
Yeah, I've been in a few clubs with them.
I guess I remember being in an airport and a dog like came up and stood me. I was totally innocent, but I was absolutely sweating.
Yeah. Not surprised.
Maybe that's what they were smelling, just a sweat.
So yeah, one thing I'll point out, it's not, I suppose, too relevant to the conspiracy, but the way that these 2 dogs alerted, one of them, what she'd do is she'd point her nose directly at the spot where she was finding whatever she was alerting to. I can't remember if that was the corpse one or the blood one. And then the other one would just stand at the spot and bark. And that was how you'd know.
It's crazy how they train.
Yeah, no, it must just be Pavlovian conditioning.
Pavlov would be so proud.
Yeah. Well, he wouldn't, because all this evidence actually it was front page news in the UK for, I think, a day. And then Clarence Mitchell ordered that it wasn't to be put on the news anymore because he said dogs couldn't be relied on. And then it's kind of just been swept under the carpet since then.
I thought dogs were actually relied on in a lot of cases.
Yeah, they are. They have been many times. But he had to pull, I suppose.
Yeah. Is it because it was like a more private trainer rather than police train?
Yeah, so he was a former police dog handler and had worked on cases for the police, but he had left and turned private, I think, 2 years before.
So one thing that people always mention when they're talking about this case in just general is how incompetent the Portuguese police reported to be. So that's one of the big stumbling blocks. You know, they were so desperate to find evidence that incriminated the McCanns that they would basically take any little grain of something and say, well, this is definite 100% fact.
I imagine that Portugal does rely a lot on tourism for its economy, and I'd also imagine at the same time that the UK is one of the number one countries.
Oh, definitely. I think there was a news report a couple of days ago how they're desperate for the UK air bridge with Portugal in light of the pandemic to keep their holiday trade going. But yeah, carry on.
I'd imagine there was a quite big hit to bookings after the whole Madeline McCann situation first started.
Definitely. I think this was also rumours going around. It was almost like a hot spot for kidnappers.
So there are a few reasons for this. So basically, the Portuguese police had the relationship with the McCanns, particularly Kate, soured very quickly because they refused to rule her out as a suspect from day one, which she said was a disgrace.
I mean,
that would just be procedure.
You think you've got one of the closest links to this child. That should just go without question, to at least be called in to not be ruled out as one, just in case. I mean, as harsh as that sounds.
Well, yeah, exactly. And as part of her questioning, the policeman questioning her was just trying to be like nice. He said, "Oh, is this your first time to Portugal?" And she said, "Yes, and it'll be my last." So I think she was kind of on the defensive straight away. She pointed fingers at them very quickly, and I suppose maybe unprofessionally, but natural response would be to point them back and say, well, you're not out of the woods either. Another thing worth noting is that in Portugal, a missing persons case isn't classed as a criminal activity because it could just be they've wandered off, even if it's a child, which means that they can't use methods such as using CCTV surveillance and phone tapping because it's not criminal, it's only civil. So
Can't
as a
use
result, this
CCTV.
kind of hindered it a little bit, I think.
Can't use CCTV footage at the hotel.
No, they weren't allowed.
Surely
No,
you'd
it's
think
because it
in
wasn't a criminal
extenuating
case.
circumstances, especially when the case has gotten as big as it has done, they'd be able to sort of bend the rules, maybe reconsider the rules or something just for future cases.
Why don't we just put Kate on a lie detector?
Because it's not allowed in court. Because
Joke.
it's only 99.5% accurate. But I would give you a good, because, I mean, okay, she could falsely come up as a wrong result, but you may as well.
Nah, I'll
just to
tell you
get a
right
good
now,
idea.
I'd fail a lie detector test. I cannot cope in those situations. Even if I'm totally innocent, I'm sweating it and probably come up as a lie.
Yeah, you're telling the
Always look
whole
guilty
truth,
of
but just the
stuff
way
I've
your
not
like,
done.
physiological
Yeah.
responses are, it just sounds like you're lying to your face.
Exactly.
It'd be the worst publicity move ever if they did want to clear their name. It came out as lying.
It's gone on for so long now. What would it really prove? It was just like both sides of the fence will be calling it into question, no matter what the outcome was.
Yeah, I agree. And I also agree now, the only way you're going to have any sort of satisfaction from the public with this case is if you find a body. And that's not going to happen. Or if you find absolute concrete proof that the parents did it, I think then people would be satisfied. I think the way it is now, if you were to find somebody and say, yeah, he did it, there's going to be a lot of people
30
saying,
years
oh,
later.
yeah, no, he didn't.
It's like
But I
so
still
they
think
talk about the
parents did it.
timing of this guy being picked up for his previous offences and it being in the area. It just seems so coincidental, especially given everything that's going on in the media. I've seen some postulating that it's a distraction tactic.
It seems crazy it took so long as well. Yeah. Is there any reason why this is only just coming to light, this whole German?
Well, that's what I've been saying, because so they've apparently known about this for at least 4 years that he was in the area. So if you know that a known paedophile was in the area on that week, why wasn't he the first name on the list? Why is it 13 years later that he's been, it might have been this guy? It's insanity. I don't know why.
If they've known about it for so long, why have they only just released it this week? Is it because they're officially looking into it? Or?
I don't know. Because it's not exactly been a slow news few months, has it? You thought he'd release this when they could get maximum attention, like not in the middle of, say, protests, coronavirus as well, and all sorts. But it's also just appealing for new information now, 13 years after. Who's going to come up? Oh, I remember this I didn't think to raise in the 12 or so years now, however many months since. But now it's just come to life. Just remembered it now. This is a missing piece, and I just highly doubt they're going to find any new evidence, like people say, have been coming forward.
No one's going to come forward now that hadn't already.
Especially with anything useful.
Yeah.
No matter how much they may have botched the original investigation. Cause...
Can't even remember what I had for lunch today, let alone things I saw in 13 years.
Think of a holiday you went on 13 years back and tell me a few of the people you remember seeing.
Exactly. I remember watching Cornwall or something. That's about as far as it goes.
Yeah.
I do remember I was in Portugal and I saw this shamanic looking guy came up to talk to me, and he was definitely carrying some anaesthetic
one as well.
Yeah,
think too much of it at the time.
Stunk of chloroform, that's what I remember. So yeah, cool. So a bit of a combined theory then, mainly from Callum, but a bit from me about the dog. So Luke, do you want to give that one a rating?
Yeah, it's definitely a very complex conspiracy with so many different branches coming out of it, so much information, and still very heavily debated 13 years on. In terms of sedating them, I mean, you mentioned they're anaesthetists, and as much as you would hope to think this kind of stuff wouldn't happen, you can imagine, you're on holiday, you're with your friends, you don't really want to be interrupted by the kids, you want a nice evening with the tapas 7. So these anaesthetists might decide, we know the safe amount, so we're going to give the kids this. And if the whole group of the tapas 7 had done the same, obviously it's something that none of them are ever going to come out and say, because they'd obviously end up going to prison for negligence there. In terms of oversedation, given it's their job, you think they wouldn't do it, but Callum did mention briefly that Madeleine kept coming into their room crying at night, so maybe they were like, oh, maybe we can just give her a bit more so that she actually does settle and not stir, so maybe they did end up giving her too much. In terms of the intruder, it seems, from what you said, very unlikely, given all the kind of caveats there are, the window and patio door and having to sedate the kids themselves, so that does seem very unlikely. And, I mean, the dogs is the thing that really, really does appeal to me, showing the McCanns have had some involvement. It seems very evident that these dogs with a very high success rate would find the smells of blood and the smells of corpse. So it just seems very strange to me that the dogs would find the smell of blood, but even more so the smell of corpse, unless somehow there'd been a death in the area. just before they came to stay, but that's obviously clutching at straws. So in terms of believability, I'm actually going to give this like a very solid 8 out of 10.
Wow.
Probably would have given it higher if this whole German suspect thing hadn't come out this week, because that does give them kind of a new hope. There's definitely something fishy going on, whether it's just the fact that they're trying to cover up their negligence and it's just got to the stage where covering up their negligence makes them look guilty is something else. But yeah, as a conspiracy as a whole, because there's so much to it and so much involvement from, the Portuguese FBI, the dogs and stuff like that, I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10.
It's one of those ones, isn't it, where you find it with every conspiracy, you wish you could find that the whole set of facts is laid out in front of you, everything that went on, everything that was found, and just so you can actually make a proper deduction. But that's never going to be the case with so many conflicting stories. So one thing you mentioned with the intruder, I think that in several interviews, Gerry McCann mentioned was very specific about the door into one of the rooms being open to 50 degrees from the right angle, when he was adamant that he'd left it closed or pushed to before he left. He's suggesting, implying that maybe someone was standing behind the door when he went to check, just poked his head round, had what he called like a proud father moment, just thinking, oh, look, there's my daughter, left. And that's when the person struck. So
it's quite chilling, that thought, isn't it? Because he says, hasn't he, that he actually believes when he made his check, the guy might have actually been in there, but he just didn't see him, the guy was hiding, which kind of sends a shiver down my spine.
It's just one of those ones. I think he said that after the event, there's almost like an off the record interview when it first came out. But it's also, when you're in that situation, you entertain all sorts of possibilities, especially when you've had so many years to think about it. But I think for my believability, it's just the amount of evidence that there is seeming there, all the work of theorists and with all the evidence that has been released. It does seem quite compelling at times, especially when you take into account things like these sniffer dogs and also the evidence of human blood being in the apartment, as well as the smell of corpses, sort of led more weight to the theory that she fell and sustained a fatal injury rather than being overly sedated. But I think there's no doubt that sedatives were in play, given the lack of response from the twins during the whole commotion, and how, say, Kate's a trained anaesthetist, etc. But I think for overall believability, you want to sort of you'd never want to condemn someone like this. And you do think that it's just, there was some elements of a poorly handled investigation, especially towards the start with the Portuguese police, especially with the McCanns not getting off on the right foot with potential language barriers and these rules that they had or laws they had in place about not treating it as a criminal investigation, so not being able to access CCTV footage, which would be incredibly useful in a situation like that. There's no Portugal's not a CCTV state like the UK is, but you think there'd be at least something that could shed some light.
One thing I will say on CCTV is I think it has since been used, because I think it now is a criminal investigation. But for the first few months, at least, it wasn't being used because it wasn't deemed criminal.
Yeah, I suppose that's just one of the parts of the puzzle. It's just this thing that comes down to as well is the sort of how tight the Tata 7, we know we've sort of ragged on them a little bit. It's like a Tarantino film. A B-Tech version, how they were so insular, all really closed off to the outside. It basically seems like they came up really formulated a story that they thought was unbreakable with so much intricate detail, but it just started to unravel as like they were scrutinized further and as time went on and certain details. It was like a game of Chinese whispers, how one person says something, it's slightly manipulated and that gets taken as the actual truth, how no one can make up their mind on certain timings of events. And basically where Madeleine was during the day, I think of the 3rd of June, there's been certain photographs and things that people have suggested have been altered, whether the date it was taken, suggesting that she might have died earlier, that this so-called last photo of her was actually taken several days previously, go to different sort of big discrepancies between the weather reports of showing a very bright and sunny photo, when in fact the weather on the 3rd of May was overcast, grey and quite cold, and yet they're sitting with their feet in the pool and Gerry McCann's sweating.
Yeah, I think the people are kind of using that to say maybe she died a few days before and they needed a few days to kind of gather themselves, get a bit of composure, decide what to do, and then dispose of the body. So yeah, I think that is another interesting thing that if we do a part 2
a bit of reading on it, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of like meteorological evidence, like you're talking about cloud formations and stuff, just to discuss like the quality of these photographs, even suggestions that the infamous one of her holding the tennis balls might have been doctored in like Photoshop. But that's definitely for another time. But so for my overall believability, I'm going to go, I think I say a 7 on the fact that the parents did it, and for the overall conspiracy, there's just so much to it. There's so much we may never know, just because we can never get inside the heads of all of these people and actually find out if they had not premeditated their story, but just really tried to stick to this chain of events that paints them in the least negative light, and then to spin it out for 13 years, you think surely something would have come forward by now, given the scale of the investigation, how much money's been ploughed into it. It's going to get a solid 9 for me on the overall conspiracy rating.
Well, high scores so far, and I'm going to follow suit, I think. I think in terms of believability, we talked about the dogs and the huge success rates. And yeah, the idea behind the sedation as well seems almost irrefutable. I think that the sedation was at least used. And Kate's mum, so Maddie's grandma, has actually said that she did used to sedate the children with Calpol, which obviously, I think you'd have to have a lot of it to be fatal, but it is certainly a possibility, especially if she said that. So yeah, I think believability wise, for the reasons that you've all mentioned already, I think I'm going to go probably for an 8 out of 10. One thing I will say about the believability actually is, for the part we've mentioned, I think an 8 out of 10. I think one of the main sticking points, I suppose, that we haven't touched on would be how they've hidden the body, because there really is so little to go on that. And I think it could potentially bring the believability fact down, just for the fact that these, to our knowledge, obviously aren't trained killers, certainly aren't trained hiders of bodies. So to so successfully hide your first kind of victim, whether it be intentional or accidental, for 13 years in such a high profile case, and for it never to be found, that's some good going. So I think maybe it brings it down a notch, just because you have to add in the fact that they've disposed of it somehow.
Yeah, that's a whole nother kind of world. Imagine this rampant speculation there. I think if there is a body, someone might find it eventually, unless they're able to, I don't know, dump it in the middle of the ocean. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main theories.
Yeah, but plus
then
you think someone would have had records and taking everything to take a boat out, travelling.
Well, they did take a boat
revolved
out.
around a tennis bag. I think they might have used as that to hide the body in.
And another one is those, when I touched on earlier, that she was sedated and had to be carried back. There are actually people who think carrying back a lifeless body when you carried her back from the beach, which is not a nice thought again. But yeah, I think maybe believability, I'll drop it to maybe a 7.5. In terms of the overall conspiracy, it's got to be a 9. I mean, it's so high profile. How the way public opinion is kind of moved in their favour and then against them, and then you've had documentaries come out and newspaper reports, the works. I think as a theory, this is about as high as you're ever going to get, especially theorising that they'd have something to do with it, these supposedly innocent parents. So yeah, I think it's really compelling. I think the use of something like dogs, and then the twists and turns it's got in terms of it maybe being accidental but then being covered up, I'm going to give it a 9.
Alrighty then.
Okay, and over to Luke for our final conspiracy.
Thanks, John. So this conspiracy is not really going to have as much depth and analysis to it as the previous conspiracies. It's not really as mainstream either, but anyway, it exists. And this theory is that Madeline McCann never actually existed.
I mean, that would be a massive outrage if that ever did get out that was the truth.
Can you imagine?
I'm looking forward to hearing this.
All the man hours that have been put into this supposed case, all the money that's been spent for absolutely nothing. Definitive answer.
People just wouldn't know how to react if they found out, surely. You wouldn't know what to do.
I think the world would be stunned into silence for about a week.
What would you do? Go out and protest? But
I don't know. I think the McCanns would get murdered.
So yeah, this is a relatively unknown theory, but it believes Madeleine isn't real and her disappearance was totally fake. A number of theories as to why it would have been made up include the Spanish government to boost Spanish tourism and ruin Portuguese tourism. However, most theories on the topic blame the British government for faking her disappearance and faking her existence as a whole. Although evidence is few and far between for this theory, it centers on the idea that we only ever see 2 real photos of Madeleine. Users have suggested if they wanted to do everything and anything they can to find her, they would release a plethora of photos. And I mean, I don't know about you two. I'm sure there's lots of photos out there in reality. I've never really looked into it, but you do get plugged the same 2 photos every time.
Yeah, I think it was one of tennis balls one, and there's one of them by the pool.
Yeah, it's also,
there's the one with her face when her hair's a bit longer, really zoomed in.
So that gets like the little eye defect thing.
Yeah, I have seen a few though. There's some where she's like about a year younger.
Yeah, there's one in an Everton shirt as well.
That's a CGI. Oh no, that's a real one, isn't it? Because then there's a CGI one of when she's like 9 years old or something.
Some conspiracy theorists have suggested that the tennis ball one is photoshopped. It's a different girl, which is her face been imposed on it.
What do you think about that, Callum?
I think when you've been told something's been photoshopped, you look at it, part of your brain starts trying to work out to think, oh, look, that could be an issue that doesn't quite look like it matches, like the textures and stuff. But I'm unconvinced, really, just even though I've read quite a bit about how the actual nature of the photo being cropped from a much larger picture, which is poorly framed. So just her standing on a corpse, but there's loads of the grass in the background and not really much focus on her. Just going back more into the death theory, but that's where I read this from. And how that Kate realistically would have taken the photo from about 200 meters away with a really zoomed in image and stuff like that.
Really?
That's the only logical place to capture from that angle, isn't it? I'm not really sure. It's all a bit sketchy, but if you look at it from a certain angle, you can see maybe that face does look a little bit out of place, if that's the right word, as if it could have been like a skillful Photoshop job, but still, that's just, I don't know.
But you don't doubt there are real photos of her?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I mean, if this theory was true, surely it's suggesting that if the government have faked this, they've had to pay off a dead kid's family because, I mean, they obviously couldn't take a live kid's photos because if that kid was spotted out in the open, like everyone would be like, oh, it's Maddie. So
it'd have to be a dead orphan. Otherwise, would recognise her and say, that's not Madeline McCann, that's whoever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's not absolutely beyond the realms of possibility. It's difficult.
I mean, the British government do have shares in an orphanage in Everton, so you never know.
There you go then.
And yeah, this theory not only looks at the photos, but it also looks at the popularity of the case itself. And John and Callum have already mentioned this, but people just can't understand why so much time, so much money, and so much attention have been given to the Madeleine McCann case when there are thousands of missing children. Could it just be to divert attention away from other issues? Could the recent German suspect be a made-up bid to divert attention away from the Dominic Cummings fiasco? Like, could every time there's a new lead on Madeline McCann, could it just be an elaborate plan from the British government to distract people from failing?
Because of the nature of how news cycles work, and there's always something big in the news and current events. If you were to piece a timeline together of every new piece of evidence that gets presented over this 13-year case, you could probably plot a sort of diagram or something. You would say, oh, there's a new piece of evidence here in the wake of the financial crisis.
Exactly. It's one of them things where there's always going to be evidence to back it up. I mean, it's like I saw, even though this is a bit off tangent, I saw a post on Facebook recently. It's saying, 2020 coronavirus, 1920 Spanish flu, 1820 cholera, etc., etc. When in reality, there's an epidemic of a disease literally every single year. So fill in that no matter what year coronavirus hits us.
Basically, it depends how tenuous one of these links to be anyway, because anything in the news is technically a big event, you'd think.
Yeah.
I think the main one of those that people point to about Madeline McCann is she went missing around time. Gordon Brown's popularity was at like an all-time low or something, and he's being criticised for being very cold, basically being criticised for being like a cold Scotsman. And so what people have claimed is this was kind of concocted so that he could be seen as first on the scene and come across as very caring for this missing young girl. But I mean, it's a bit far-fetched that he would invent all this just so people don't describe him as a bit cold.
Does that explain why after just 9 hours since her disappearance, he was alerted by the friend of the family?
Yeah.
I mean, she was planted there to get friendly with the McCanns. He's actually working for the government.
I did check out the original date she went missing to find if there was any major news at the time. There was none, apart from Manchester United winning another Premier League title. So, I mean, you can't blame the powers that be for wanting to divert attention away from that. But, I mean, I guess you could argue that's either this theory totally falling apart or it's a perfect moment to start this theory because then it arouses any suspicions because, I mean, the case started on a slow news period, which is quite rare in the UK and kind of the world, full stop.
It's almost like this is like a contingency plan for the future. If any,
So start it when the news is slow, but then whenever there's anything that they need to divert attention away from, bring it back up again. Because as we know, this case does pop up every now and then. I mean, probably at least once a year, I'd say.
Yeah, it does. It would be interesting to see a timeline of when it's been featured in the newspapers and then anything going on at that time.
Yeah, should have a trawl through the archives of the Daily Mail, see if you can find anything, John.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do my best.
So personally, I didn't really like the explanation of the photos and the divert attention away. And I did actually find another reason why people believe that Maddie never existed. And I find this one slightly more believable. Maybe not believable as such, but it's more interesting. And that theory is that the British government did it to launder money. I mean, I'm not entirely sure who is auditing the British government's accounts in the first place that they really need to launder money.
Yeah.
And obviously the money spent on the Madeleine McCann case is a tiny proportion of British GDP. But you never know, maybe there's some crazy research projects carried out by the British government that they want to keep undercover and they are spending relatively high amounts on. And so by plugging it into the fake Madeleine McCann case, they can get away with it and launder their money that way.
maybe there's a possibly just to hide some slightly more dodgy financial dealings. But when you think how many millions of taxpayer money is that, 11 million or something like that?
Yeah, it's estimated to be about as high as 14, but even so, it's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, especially compared to the UK's GDP and how much money they would be spending on other things. It'd be the grand account of the UK government, 11 million over the course of 13 years. It's not flagged up at all.
John's the accountant here. I mean, all GDP calculations, or maybe not GDP, but some kind of account calculations called net omissions and errors.
Yeah, there is.
And because obviously the British government deal in so much money, obviously some just gets missed out by accounting purposes because it's impossible to track all the money. So, I mean, I'm almost certain that'll be much higher than 11 million and
Yeah.
probably in the hundreds of millions, if not billions. So it's something they could definitely get away with. But
Firstly, I'm with you. I don't know who audits the UK government, whether anyone does. But I don't know whether it would be specific enough that they'd have to put that 11 or 14 million down as Madeline McCann, or whether they could just put it in missing persons.
I don't
So
think
it seems unnecessary anyway.
Yeah, exactly. They could just launder it through the missing persons because, I mean,
Yeah.
11 million, it's a lot, but I'd imagine the missing persons fund is quite a bit higher, and I imagine even more so it's probably in the police accounts. All these theories obviously are suggesting the parents are paid actors. And I mean, if this was the case, like, you must imagine they're getting paid a hell of a lot of money because they're totally villainized across the whole UK.
It's a very long-running gig as well.
Yeah.
No.
Also, one thing to counter that, unless you want to say the web goes even further, my brother's mate sometimes has lectures from Gerry McCann because he does like medicine or whatever at Leicester Uni. So unless you're saying he's an actor, the lecturer's an actor as well. And he's had to learn the syllabus.
He's got to keep up appearances, hasn't he?
You're not allowed to ask him anything about the case.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but surely not. Surely if that's a lecturer at a university, he's getting an absolute hound.
Yeah, I know. I bet they're like on Slido and stuff like that. All the like, what's it called?
Was it Kahoot?
Kahoot.
Kahoot, that's the one.
I bet on that everyone's names like Madeline, Milan and stuff.
Yeah, balls of steel to go up and do that. You've been in the public eye for that long. Imagine if it was a secondary school, it would be even worse. Some university students might be a bit more mature about it, but if you lost control of a class, it would be.
But yeah, I mean, they must be paid a ton because they can't catch a break every time they're out. I imagine they're getting shouted at and hounded. And I mean, that's the end of my theory, but I just wanted to discuss why the hell they haven't moved out of the UK and gone to, I don't know, maybe Australia, where they won't be as heavily recognised and can live a normal life. Because, I mean, it must be hard for them, and especially for their children, because I mean, at school, their children are probably being told this, that, and God knows what else about their parents. So I'm just very surprised they haven't moved away.
Well, you say that, and you two know this already, but I've actually seen Kate McCann in real life. Just walked past her in a town called Loughborough, and she wasn't getting any hassle. She wasn't getting any abuse. I don't know whether people just didn't recognise her, or it was just at a time when she wasn't really in the news much, but I didn't see anything.
I mean, I'm sure it's not non-stop, but I'd imagine it happens relatively regularly.
Yeah, especially now that public opinion's turned against them a bit more as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they still live in the same town that they lived in before, possibly even in the same house.
I guess it could be their way of trying to say we're innocent, like we're not going to run away.
Yeah.
True. They still go to tapas with the rest of the seven? Are they still the gang still together?
God, no.
Yeah, always frequent the local tapas bars.
In the dinner reunion, Torsi.
Just expecting it to be Kate and Gerry rocking up at the Oscars or something on a big documentary of the 20-year anniversary. It's like, this is the biggest scam. It's been a long-running working collaboration between the British government and the film director. The biggest social experiment going.
And that documentary and the greatest social experiment of all time. You'd have to applaud.
Yeah, you would.
The sheer audacity.
Imagine if it didn't even win as well.
The length of method acting that Kate and Gerry had to go through.
Just imagine it flops at the box office as well.
No, I don't think there's any chance of that flopping at the box office.
Elaborate YouTube video from Josh Peters how he convinced the world that a kid went missing for 20 years.
Prank gone wrong. Gone viral.
Oh yeah, so that's it. It's not a very in-depth or long theory, but I'm guessing the believability ratings are going to be low, but let's hear them anyway.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be getting the same level as some of the ones we've had previously on the social media episode and the ones we just discussed. So I think my believability has to be I'll entertain a slight little bit, I'll go for a 2. I think there could be something in here and there. It's not everything is what it seems. But for just the audacity of suggesting that it could have been a hoax, given all of this media attention it's had over the years, all the money's been spent on it, I'll give it an 8 as a conspiracy theory, because it's really, really pushing the boundaries of questioning what's actually going on with one of the most high-profile cases, certainly in our recent memory.
Yeah, so I'm going to follow suit, I think, in terms of believability. There's a few convenient things, I suppose, just in terms of, like, obviously the timing of the recent development and things like that, with everything else going on in the world. But yeah, I think other than that, it's quite difficult. Maybe a few photoshopped images here and there, but I think I'm going to have to go with like a 1.5 for believability. I'm struggling with this one, that she never actually existed and it was all a ruse.
I'll take that.
Yeah, still higher
The
than
aim
most
is to
people
get-
would give you.
The aim is to get a 0. What a week. Given Prince Philip got a 1, I don't know how possible.
Yeah, what would get a 0? What sort of conspiracy would get a 0 on this podcast? And a challenge for the next episode.
I'm going to try and come up with one.
Because every time I'm
Wait for
with it,
conspiracy, you might
Yeah.
find something that'd get a 0.
yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, every time I'm trying to look for ones that are really grounded, I've got like lots of information there that could be, I'm trying to get the believability up as high as I can,
Yeah,
rather than the
same.
other way around.
Okay, for the overall theory, I'm going to give it a 7.5. It's a very entertaining theory, as much as there isn't a great deal of evidence backing it. So yeah, I think I'll go over 7.5.
Yeah, in terms of believability, I actually think the fact that there's so little evidence makes it more believable, because the British government and the MI5 have clearly worked wonders to
That's
cover
true.
their tracks. But no, just in all seriousness, it's a 1.5 out of 10 for believability. It's definitely one of the more far-fetched ones we've had. As a conspiracy as a whole, it kind of just brings, I guess, a fresh view to everything. But I mean, it just gets completely pulled apart if you even take any looks into it. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10.
If anyone asks you any question, you just crumble.
I mean, I literally saw people so convinced by the money laundering one that the British
What?
government would need to launder £11 million, when in reality it's literally in the minute percentages of GDP and could easily be. I mean, you could literally just say, look, I'm going to give schools like this much money and just put 11 million extra on there and
Yeah, exactly.
probably go under the radar.
Right, shall we move on, finish this podcast with a game of conspiracy?
I think we need
Let's
to
do it.
lighten the mood a little bit.
Excellent. For those of you who don't know, this is a little game we play at the end of every episode where we list 3 conspiracies, 2 of which are genuine conspiracies in the sense that the host has found them somewhere online and there's at least one person who believes it. And then the other theory is one that the host has made up. And it's the job of the other 2 co-hosts to guess which 2 were found online and which one was made up. So, conspiracy number 1. I will say that with this week's ones, they're all kind of much of a muchness. I'm hoping it's going to be tricky for you.
Let's find out.
Now I've said that, it probably won't be.
Don't do yourself a disservice.
And also, can I just preface this by saying, please don't push me too much on them, because none of them have a great deal of backing.
We'll treat each one equally. We won't discriminate.
Okay, good. Right, number 1. Madeline McCann was kidnapped by David Payne, who was one of the McCann's friends, or part of the Tapas 7, who went with them, because he was actually a paedophile.
I do love a Tapas 7 conspiracy.
We're going to be responsible for them breaking up. Okay, number 2. Kate McCann actually killed Madeleine as revenge on Gerry McCann, who she suspected was cheating on her. And number 3. Madeline McCann was a clone that went wrong and died due to being faulty.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm convinced by that one, Gallagher.
I don't know what to believe, because this one that's so outlandish is actually true. It's like the massive red herring.
The thing is, something as outlandish as that is something that definitely been made up by someone. I mean, it just seems ridiculous. I mean, for the Kate McCann one, she's so villainized. I don't know if it's true, but personally, I feel Kate's been more villainized than Gerry.
I agree, yeah.
And I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if, as a result of that, people have come up with that conspiracy that she's killed her to get back at Gerry. It's just where the whole cheating allegations come from, I guess.
There's a member of the Tapas 7.
That was a whole swingers thing, one.
Because that is a thing. That is a heavy theory.
What, the Tapas 7 was all
Yeah,
swingers?
because they've been on holiday a few times before, and they'd always like leave the kids in like the crashes and stuff. A lot of people think that they actually were. going for that reason.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No wonder they had to sedate the kid.
Speaking of Tapas 7, that's David Payne. What more can you tell me about his background, where he's brought up? Do you have any childhood trauma experiences? Anything that could have contributed him to perhaps becoming a paedophile? I'm just kidding. I won't dig that deep into it.
Right, I'll give you the tiny bit of evidence I've got for these. Apparently, someone who went on holiday with the Tapas 7 on a holiday, I think the year before, but wasn't on this one, said he saw Gerry and David talking to each other about Madeleine and about David's daughter in like inappropriate ways and doing like inappropriate kind of gestures about it. So I think that's where some of the grounding of that one's come from. The Kate killing Maddie's revenge for Gerry cheating, the only real stuff I could find on that is supposedly Maddie was Gerry's favourite child. So she did it for that reason, targeted Maddie. I suppose like firstborn favourite.
Do you remember he recounts having a proud father moment, seeing Maddie asleep when he went back to check on them, as though his story.
Yeah.
There's something there.
And then the clone one, the proof that she's a clone and was a bit faulty is allegedly Madeleine had been described by a few people who said they thought she was autistic. And she also has that little speck in her eye, which people say is another side. She could be like, something just went slightly wrong with her cloning process.
I suppose it is a good sign for conspiracy that I have absolutely no idea which one I'm going to suggest, even though I found the cloning one. It seems a bit laughable at first, just the way you described it, but when you think about it, I don't want to be like an idiot and say that one and find out actually being true, it's actually true and someone thinks that. So I don't know.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if you two agree again, I suppose, because there's been a bit of division recently. It's been a while since it was a consensus.
Yeah,
it's a really tough one. I mean, it shouldn't be a tough one. Realistically, we should both be picking the clone one, but it just seems so obscure that it's John double bluffing by throwing that in there.
That's my line of thought as well. I do think he might be double bluffing, so I'm not going to go for the clone one.
Okay.
I've decided I was just going on a limb and say that the first one, that was it David Payne being a pedo.
Yeah.
The conspiracy.
This is frustrating because I don't want to go for the clone one, but at the same time, I feel like Kate McCann one is the one that is most likely to have been made up just because of how nice she is, and I also don't want to go with Callum because I don't know where. I'm sure I've heard something about David Payne before, and I'm really not as well educated on the whole Madeline McCann theory as you guys. And the Tapas 7 will seem a bit strange, so you wouldn't rule out one of them being like that. So I'm going to go for the Kate McCann one actually, because the clone one just seems too obscure that it's a double bluff, but I guess we'll find out.
Okay, so Callum, you think the David Payne one was made up by me. Luke, you think the Kate killing her as revenge for cheating was made up by me, yeah?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I can say that you were both correct to avoid the cloning one, because that is a genuine theory that I actually found in more than one place.
Oh, for goodness sake. I might have looked that up after.
But our winner this week is Luke.
Get in there.
So I made up the one about revenge for Gerry cheating, and then the Madeline McCann David Payne one, that was actually on Sean Atwood's YouTube channel.
Oh, was it? Okay. I didn't actually think to look through his for Madeline McCann. I wasn't sure he was big on that.
I thought it was a risk putting it in because I know you don't mind a bit of Sean Atwood.
I don't. I do like him. But I just thought the Kate one, given she's been villainized and she does come across as cold in the public eye, she's not really liked that much. I thought it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility for someone to maybe push it even further and think, yes, she was responsible.
I feel like people do believe that she is responsible, but maybe just not for the reason.
Yeah,
I suppose. That was a believable one that you made up.
Yeah.
That had me going for sure on a 2 losing streak.
Yeah, so it goes down as a win for Luke, but also a win for Conspiracy because I managed to con at least one of you.
Good stuff.
So, should we sign off there?
I think we should.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody, once again. Congrats if you made it this far. We've thoroughly enjoyed this one, and we're hoping for a few more updates, potentially in the case in the coming days.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those ones. It's one of the most fascinating cases that's been in the British media for the past few years, or the past decade, and then some. And it makes you wonder if you ever want to pick Praia da Luz as a holiday destination in the future. You could add it to the Co-Conspirators list of destinations you're going to visit. It's part of a podcast road trip, world tour, if you want to call it.
Yeah, on that topic, I actually did find online, I don't know if they're still doing them, but for a certain period of time, they were running like tours of the Madeline McCann apartment and then to the tapas bar and stuff.
That
People would go on it. I know, it's crazy.
They do all kind of the tours in Hollywood and stuff.
Yeah, I think...
One of them is I was listening to a podcast about The Sopranos. It was run by an actual ex-mobster who takes you around all these places where people have been whacked.
I know there's a Charles Manson one as well. Might have to do a road trip.
Yeah, people just have a fascination with the deaths and stuff like the dark stuff like that. So clearly sells tickets.
Yeah, morbid curiosity.
I think that's a suitable bombshell to leave it on for this episode.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, everybody, and hopefully catch you in the next one.
Thank you.
Keep challenging the status quo. Goodbye.